The book of Hebrews, chapter 11, is giving us a roll call of people who trusted in God and the victories they actually got. And they got many, many victories. Looking at verse 32, we read, "And what more shall I say?" I don't have time to tell you about Gideon. Remember Gideon? And the reason Gideon got the result he got, he was a weak man according to himself, from the Sumerian tribe according to himself, until he realized it's God speaking. And even then he had to verify, produce the fleece in order to be sure it's God. Once he is sure it was God, he was able to lead, to mobilize people and lead them into fighting. Now, God of course set him further by telling him to allow some of his soldiers to go home. He did not want him to have victory using a lot of people, because then he is likely to start to stop trusting in God and start trusting in the army. And you know the story. The reason we are being reminded is so that you also think about the circumstances you happen to be in. You are a person who is having various challenges that you are facing. And the question that you must answer is, are you the kind of a person who is discouraged and cannot trust in God? Please remember Gideon and his exploits, all because he trusted in God. That should help you to learn to trust in God irrespective of the small areas. Of course, the other thing is, we learn in the process that God doesn't get annoyed if you ask questions and ask it to be for God to clarify, because he didn't get annoyed with Gideon. He trusted. But finally, act by faith and you see the result. The next guy listed is Barak. And you know, in Judges chapter 4 verse 6 we read how the lady general sent Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zabulon, and lead them to Mount Tabor." Verse 8 says, Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go with you. Don't go with me, I will not go." You know, Barak did not trust in God directly. He trusted God through a woman, Deborah. But God still came through. But in terms of rewarding, it was clear the rewards did not necessarily be Barak's, because of the way he had gone about trusting in God. So when you remember Barak, remember that God is not a respecter of people. He actually is one who will help all and sundry who trust in him. Because Barak had weak faith, but God was with him. And he gave him victory, which is important. The next guy given is Samson. And again, you know the story of Samson, that God committed himself to Samson even before Samson's birth. And when he was born and the parents kept the rules, he gained the strength to conquer that he had been promised. And he actually did do a lot of exploits in Israel. But then he became immoral. And that immorality led him to losing his eyes. But God did not forget him. The hair grew again, And the day he died, he killed more people through his own death than he had killed when he was alive. And again, when you remember that story, what does it remind you? Do you sometimes feel like the things God has given you are your own? And so it gives you the daring spirit of being involved in sin, believing nothing can happen with you because after all, the Spirit of God has done many things through you in the past. So you become immoral like Samson, and you may end up losing your eyes. I think that's something that you need to talk about. And the story of Samson is a very sorry story. You wish he didn't go, because you see he had a very good promise from God, and it's a pity. And he had good, very loving parents, but he insisted on going his way, trusting himself rather than trusting in God. The next guy listed is a guy called Jephthah, the Gileadite, who was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute, according to Judges chapter 11. Gilead's wife and also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. You are not going to get any inheritance in our family, they said, because you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his fathers and settled in the land of Tob, where a gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. That is Jephthah, with not a too interesting history. In fact, verse 6, Hebrews 10 verse 6 says, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and Ashtoreths, and the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. Because the Israelites forsook the Lord, because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him. Wow. These are the days of Jephthah, the Gileadite. And we need to ask ourselves, is God calling us when the circumstances are difficult? Despite these are people who have thrown me out of my father's house, these are people in problems. Do I get touched? Or do I feel like revenging? Let them suffer. In verse 11, chapter Judges 11:5, it says, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Jephthah said to them, didn't you hate me and drive me out from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you are in trouble? You know, that's one of the things you ask. Who is it that you are not helping? Although you know very well whatever you have done is God who has resourced it. But now you want to use that power God has given you, that knowledge God has given you, as a way of revenging. Is that something that you need to ask yourself? You know, in Judges 11 verse 13 we read, the king of Ammonites answered Jephthah's messenger, when Israel came up out of Egypt, they took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, all the way to the Jordan. Now give it back peacefully. Jephthah sent back messengers to the Ammonite king, saying, this is what Jephthah says, Israel did not take the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. And that, of course, set the ground for fighting. And they fought and won. So what lessons do you learn as you think about the things that Jephthah accomplished despite a beginning which would have made him not want to win victory for people who hate him. So may the Lord bring you to where you realize you cannot be a Christian and be vengeful. He says clearly, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. So for you, allow God to use you. Trust him. It's him who will do it, but through you. And you will see the many victories and many exploits you are going to end up having if that's what you choose to do. The next guy listed is David. And David we know very well. I've written a book titled Leadership King David Style. I have really admired David. But the main reason is his faith in God. He knew God could be trusted. He knew God is loving. And it exhibited throughout his life. And so he stayed in the straight and narrow, both when he was young and when he was old. And so David ended up becoming the marker of all Israel. You always talk about he did not live like David, his forefather. And it has to do with his prayer life. It has to do with his trusting in God. It was to do with his repentance. Because he did fail, but he repented. All those are things that will be important if you are going to walk with him. May the Lord help you to be like David. The other guy given is Samuel. Samuel was both a judge and a prophet. And it's a very interesting story. From miraculous birth, because the mother could not get a child, Hannah could not get a child for a long time. And when he got the child, decided to donate the child to the church, to the training in the place. And that will be critical to the way he ruled Israel, and to his willingness to appoint a replacement, whom he appointed not because he wanted, but because the people insisted and God approved. That is a very important thing to note and think about if you are going to learn this result of people who trusted in God, had faith in God. So Samuel is an example. I like the way he ends his journey by saying, hey, and he's calling a meeting. Do an audit on me. Whose cow have I stolen? He was so sure he had led with integrity that he kind of provoked them to talk. How many of us who are leaders would want to ask whether there's anybody who has ever been unhappy with us? I don't think it will be easy, but it's something that we need to think about. So Samuel the judge, Samuel the prophet, I think it will be important to take his example. Remember when he went to anoint one of the sons of Jesse, and he was in agreement with Jesse, they start with the bigger ones, the most capable. But he knew he had to listen to God. So, although it was not his choice to pick the small boy from the village, I think it becomes easy to understand that God had meant to appoint David. And so, irrespective of the thinking of Samuel and Jesse, Samuel decided to obey God. And if you're going to walk by faith and get results, it will mean many times you override your desires and your preferences to do what God wants you to do, which will be an important thing. Verse 13 in Hebrews 11 verse 13 says, who through faith conquered kingdoms. Who are those? Barak, David, they conquered kingdom. And how did they do it? They trusted in God. God gave them the ability. And I think that will be something important for us to see. Now, others administered justice. Some did that and gained what was promised. Who shut the mouth of lions. Now, so there are people who administer justice by trusting in God, but there are others who gained what was promised. In other words, it was clear that there are promises, they claimed them, because of faith and trusting God's willingness to do what He has promised. They ended up being rewarded. And I think that will be something that you need to ask yourself whether that you are doing that. Because if you are not, then it will be difficult to say you are walking by faith. Like that which is given as example. So you have to administer justice by faith. Managers, trust God, don't walk with your own wisdom. And if you want to get God's promises, trust Him, and you'll gain those promises. But you know, here it says some of the people not listed here are people who shut the mouths of lions. That must be Daniel. How did he do it? He just went in. If God, you want me to die, I'm okay. But you are also capable of closing the mouth of the lion. And God did it. So that by the morning, he came out unscathed. All that has to do with trusting in God. The importance of trusting in God. So, verse 13, therefore, is giving a list of, instead of giving names, it's giving the list of things that were done. In verse 34 says, there are some who quench the fury of the flames. And here we are talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are three boys who trusted God so sincerely, believed in God so sincerely. They knew, absolutely knew, the king is no match for God. But they also did know that God can get glorified by them dying in the fire. So they didn't know what God would do, but they knew God was in charge. I think that is something we need to think about clearly. About, do we behave like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Trust in God, and we are willing to go into the fire. Aware right in the fire that the God who can prevent you go to the fire is a God who can protect you within the fire. So never give up in God, even when things have gotten to the very worst. He is still there, like happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They quenched the fury of the flames. And then we now can go to Hebrews 11, verse 15. Verse 35. But let's first of all finish verse 34. Not only are there people who quench the fury of flames, the others who escaped the edge of the sword. In other words, somebody wanted to kill them, but they didn't die. And that's what happened to Elijah when Jezebel was unhappy with him. But he didn't die. Raised to life again. Elijah again did that. There were others and she's still trying to describe. There were verse 35. There were others who were tortured. That That's an interesting one. And of course, there are many who are tortured and suffered in the process. And the others whose weakness was turned to strength, and I've already given examples of that, like Gideon, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. David did that quite a lot. And I think that will be something critical as you are preparing a checklist. And you need to ask yourself, have you faced things like that? Others who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies, women received back their dead. Yeah. So you can trust God and He will raise the dead. Some faced jeers and flogging. And in that they continue trusting God. And even chains and imprisonment. And God got them out of prison. Joseph is an example. You need to ask yourself whether you have experienced that. There were others who were tortured, refused to be released so that they might again an even better resurrection. These are people who actually trusted in God and did not want to do anything just to get advantage. They were put to death by stoning. You trust in God, and God allows them to continue stoning you until you are dead. Or you are left for, like happened to Paul many times, you are left for dead, and then you revive and move on to go and preach in another city. That will be important to note and to think about. So who are those people who who got dead by stoning? I think we have Stephen. Others were sold into two. I have no idea who it is, who suffered that this injustice. We trusted in God and they decided to cut him into two. You know, the world was not happy or worthy of them. In other words, you feel like if to be in the world means I compromise, I would rather die. And they're saying when you trust in God that much, you say the world is not worthy of you. They wandered in deserts and mountains. Now that you have no acceptable place. And of course, in the process, you may end up living in caves and or in a hole, living in caves and in holes on the ground. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins. That must be John the Baptist. Destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. That is true of many of them. It happened to them. These were all commended, according to verse 9, commended for their faith. Because it's that trust in God that allows them to face the troubles. Yet none of them received what He had promised. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And I think that will be something very important to understand. So if we all want to enjoy God's goodies, it will be important that we put faith in whatever issues we are dealing with, so that we are sure it is God accomplishing things through us. And you know, here we can see what we are talking about is that this last number of people were people who had faith even of resurrection. These are a kind of faith that allows them to accept torture, to accept imprisonment, to accept jeers, to accept to live in sheepskins. And if that's done, that will be the result of faith. Because you trust in God, you go through suffering. And you are sure one day in heaven, you'll be able to tell the story. You know, faith is trusting God and loving the person irrespective of how they are. You know, for us today, like verse 4 suggests, we are able to honor God, and we are able to benefit from seeing the full plan of salvation, whereas them they were only seeing the immediate, but we have the total picture because we are living in the New Testament. May the Lord help us to just see these things that will be critical for us. As we look at the full plan of salvation, may a small problem not cause us to distrust God. May we be encouraged to endure the pain because we have hope and we believe in God. Remember, we are justified by faith. May that faith take us through good times and challenging times, all of them, that we may honor God. So the list of these giants talks about by faith this, by faith that. Then it gives you a list of accomplishments that were only done because of Christ, because of faith in God. Then finally finishes by showing people who suffered because of faith in God. So it doesn't mean when you trust in God there will be no faith, there will be no suffering. It just means that you'll be able to trust Him irrespective of the circumstances you happen to be in. May the Lord help us to walk with Him and trust Him fully. And having trusted Him, to talk to others about this trust. Because you can see, if you don't trust, how do you face the future? How do you even face today? It becomes a very frustrating and fearful life. But when you trust in a God who will take care of you, then you can be facing the biggest mountain, but you will still be at peace. You may be going through a hard time, but you'll still be feeling contented. You may go through the biggest failure, but you know you are believing a God who can undo the matter. Here we have learned that there are these people trusted in God and believe that even God can raise the dead. That's why Abraham is willing to kill his son, and he's the only son, and it's through him he is supposed to get an inheritance. But it says God has the capacity to sort out in every way. Learn to trust Him. and to walk with him, and so to be an impact, to have an impact on others.